Cleared on all counts, Lady Nourse. Okay, so I'm just going to read this article. This is from the Telegraph in June 2021. Lady Nourse, the stain of these disgusting allegations will last for the rest of my life. Now I'm going to show you a clip of a video of her being interviewed at the end of this video, so you can see the effect it has on her. In her first interview, she was exonerated of child sex abuse charges, and as a widow of a leading judge, she's calling for a change in the law. So Lavinia Nourse is reeling from what she calls post-traumatic stress disorder. Until late 2017, she led the gilded life you might imagine of the wife of one of the leading judges in the UK. She was popular in legal circles and political circles in London and the racing town of Newmarket, and so on and so forth. Okay, so she had a comfortable lifestyle. Then her life took a series of dreadful turns. First her husband died, and she was widowed after 45 years of a happy marriage that had produced 2 children, so on and so forth. Then this bombshell hit, and my life altered totally overnight, she said. It was just the worst nightmare anybody could find themselves in. Last month, Lady Nourse, now 77, was acquitted of 17 counts of historic sex abuse of a boy under the age of 12. The journey from her accuser confronting her with his allegations to the jury retiring to consider its decision took more than 3 years, undermining her mental and physical health. Her acquittal in just over 3 hours means her accuser is not a victim, and it was claimed in court that he had a financial motive for alleging the abuse. Yet he retains anonymity for life. Lady Nourse, however, lost hers when she was charged. Now she is campaigning for those accused of child abuse to have anonymity until and unless convicted. And she is supporting a pressure group that includes a number of other figures who have been accused in recent years. The article goes on, what has happened to Lady Nourse can only add to the outrage that followed the interview under caution of the late Lord Britton for which no sufficient evidence was ever produced and which caused his widow to take substantial compensation from the Metropolitan Police. Now, of course, you have to have money to do this. I considered suing the police, but when I did some investigation, I realised I couldn't afford to do it. But if you've got the money, then you can do it. If you don't, then it's more difficult. However, Lady Nourse remains heavily out of pocket, despite her innocence, because her costs in winning the case are covered only at a meagre legal aid rate, and she was effectively fighting for her life. She had no choice but to hire a brilliant QC. I desperately want the law to change, she told me this week at her Newmarket home. That's the only reason I'm doing this interview. I feel a massive injustice. I will get over it, but it's going to take me a very long time. Had I been found guilty, it would have been a different matter. I have to have my photograph splashed across every newspaper with the details of the case, but the accuser has anonymity for life. I shall hold my head up, she maintains, but the strain is evident. That information is going to be there for the rest of my life because of the very lasting, terrible stain that it leaves on the accused. They always say there is no smoke without fire, and some people even now will, I'm sure, be saying, oh well, the jury got it wrong. I have to live with that. She goes on to say, I think I'm lucky in that I seem to have a fairly strong physique. Her voice trembles, and from this point on she's on the edge of tears. But I think it would have destroyed a lot of people, totally destroyed them. Now I'm going to show you a clip of a video of her being interviewed at the end of this video, so you can see the effect it has on her. Despite one of her late husband's friends helping her assemble a fine legal team, she became convinced she was going to go to prison. But why, knowing she was innocent, she was asked? Because I didn't trust anybody any longer. My whole faith in humanity had been shattered. And again, I can relate to this. I'm now very cynical about the legal system and how it all works. And you should be too, I would say. Again, I'm not going to read all of this. She remembers little of her trial. She could not bring herself to believe the jury would acquit her. And again, I understood this. And when I was in my case, you have to prepare yourself for the worst. It's the only way you really can survive. She goes on, I know it sounds pathetic, but I was so frightened I didn't dare. When on the trial's 9th day, the jury retired, I just paced around the room. I was very nearly sick. I couldn't eat, I couldn't drink, I was petrified, absolutely petrified, and I virtually collapsed when I went into court. And then she was found not guilty. She was cleared of all the 17 accounts. In a statement after her acquittal, she said, defending myself and my husband's memory during the trial has been the most difficult and heaviest burden of my life. And again, she goes on, and the ordeal continues. The total exposure of my life, details of my marriage, having all this in the public domain for people to pick over for the rest of my life and beyond. The burden of it is always there. It never goes away. As I explain in the video on mental health and how to recover and manage the emotional and psychological turmoil of going through something like this, you have to, I wrote off a year of my life afterwards just to let things get back to normal, and then they don't really. Okay, now I just want to show you part of a video, an interview with Lady Nourse that was conducted by the BBC. I will play it pretty much all the way through, but I will stop it for one or two comments.
You had to go through the court case with the complainant, with the person known to you alleging those things in front of you.
Now, you'll note the interviewer used the word complainant, which is good. Often media interviewers use the word victim, but I do wonder whether she used the word complainant in this case because of the woman that was sitting opposite her.
And he chose not to be behind a screen, which is normal. And so I had to face him face to face.
What was that like?
Well, I think, it was horrendous. Horrendous. I mean, and because it was a Nightingale court, he was as close to me as you are now. And to have to sit for the best part of a day and a half and listen to all the ghastly things that were said about me, I don't have to say. Otherwise I'll break down completely. It's just the worst nightmare. You wouldn't wish it on your worst enemy. Well, you couldn't wish it on your worst enemy. It's just horrendous. That's all I can say. It's a nightmare. Absolute nightmare.
Now, this part is interesting because you can see how the impact of the case has traumatised Lady Nourse. This is quite a good example of how a case like this can really get under the skin of an individual. She's obviously a woman who's seen a long life and is pretty robust, but you can see how she's been broken by this case.
The jury was out for a short time?
I believe so. Jonathan Kaplan, my utterly amazing QC, he told me that we left the court. They then had an hour for lunch. So it was actually only 2 and a bit hours they were out. And he said that given the, not complexity, but given the amount of paperwork that the jury would have to go through, they had obviously made up their minds pretty quickly that there was no case to answer, if that's the right word, and so they came back very quickly. But I've got no experience because my husband was a chancery lawyer and he only did commercial work. I had no experience of criminal courts at all. But the moment that they had to go out, I think those 3.5 hours of probably the worst of my life. I remember it was pouring with rain and I sat there looking out the window. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't do anything. And I'd been like that for weeks. And then they almost had to drag me back into the court because I was so frightened, absolutely petrified of what was going to happen.
Do you remember hearing
Yes, I do.
that you were cleared?
And, I just still didn't believe it. I mean, I had to go through 17 times not guilty, but after the first one, I almost collapsed. In fact, I did collapse latterly. It took me days to believe it. And sometimes even now, I can't quite believe it because I know that may sound strange, but when you've lived with something for so long and you've the fear of and the trauma of what might happen, it doesn't go overnight. It just doesn't go overnight.
Now, this is very true. Things don't change overnight. In my case, I decided to write off the next year to let the toxins bleed out of the system. So I've mentioned some of this in the other video about looking after your mental health, but it's very true. You can't just shake it off the next day.
And I'm better now than I was 2 months ago, but even so, I'm still plagued with nightmares. You know, I can tell you exactly what the juror was wearing. I mean, it was a young girl, and I just, well, I can't. It was just awful. I did collapse, and then people kept saying, "Oh, well, you must be celebrating," but then you're not celebrating. What's to celebrate? There's nothing. I'm left with a shattered life, which I have to pick up and hold my head up. And but what's been said, what's been written, will live with me forever.
And there you go. If it can happen to her, it can happen to you. Thank you for tuning in. Please do like and subscribe and check out the other videos. If you want to support me, that would be a great help and much appreciated. You can buy me a coffee. Follow the link in the description, or you can even check out the books, Mad as Hell Parts 1 and 2. Part 1 is the 899 days on bail before I was charged, and then Part 2 is the 7 months of the trial preparation before the case against me was dropped. The ebook and paperback is available on Amazon. Search for Mad as Hell by David M. Anderson, and you could probably go into a bookshop and they could order it from their systems as well. And of course, if you or a loved one are experiencing legal troubles yourself, I hope you found this channel and video useful, and the very best of luck. Thanks.